All right, today we're jumping into Tara Westover's incredible memoir, Educated. This is a story that takes you deep into a life that's, well, completely off the grid, at the base of a mountain in Idaho. It's an unbelievable journey that starts in a world of pure survivalism and somehow ends up in the halls of Cambridge University.
So the book opens with this line, and it just stops you in your tracks, right? But for Tara Westover, this wasn't some shocking revelation. It was just a fact of her life. No birth certificate, no school records, no medical history whatsoever. Think about that. To the rest of the world, she was basically a ghost, completely invisible to the very systems we all use to define who we are.
Okay, so where does all this start? It begins on Buck's Peak, a mountain in Idaho. And for the Westover family, this mountain wasn't just a pretty backdrop. It was their entire universe. And this deep, deep isolation, it wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a core part of their identity.
And this quote from the book, man, it just lays it all out there. It shows you just how completely cut off they were. I mean, think about that for a second. Every single system we take for granted, healthcare, education, even having an official ID, wasn't just seen as unnecessary, but as an actual threat. They chose a life of radical and, often really dangerous self-sufficiency. So their lives weren't about school calendars or holidays. Nope. They lived by the seasons. Summers were for bottling peaches, and winters were for rotating supplies in their huge basement. They were true survivalists, constantly getting ready for what they called the days of abomination, a doomsday they were absolutely sure was coming. In their own minds, they were just as permanent, just as eternal as the mountain they lived on.
So who was the architect behind all of this? That would be Tara's father. He was this incredibly charismatic guy, but his personal beliefs, a really powerful mix of fundamentalist faith, a deep distrust of the government, and just total conviction. That gospel shaped every single part of their lives. For him, the world was completely black and white. There was absolutely no gray area. On one side, you had the faithful, the people who relied only on God and their own two hands. And on the other side, well, that was what he called the Illuminati, which was pretty much his catch-all term for every corrupt modern institution you can think of, the government, doctors, and especially public schools.
And this paranoia? Oh, it wasn't just some abstract idea he had. It became terrifyingly real for him during the siege at Ruby Ridge back in '92. He saw the Weaver family as basically a mirror of his own family, freedom fighters being persecuted by the feds. For Tara and her siblings, this story became a recurring, horrifying nightmare, and it was the thing that kicked their family's preparations for war into high gear.
And it all came down to this one chilling phrase. Next time, it could be us. That single sentence just echoed through Tara's entire childhood. It was the justification for everything. The buried rifles, those head-for-the-hills bags they had packed. It was all because of this constant, gnawing fear that the outside world wasn't just different, it was deadly.
Okay, so her father's rule seems totally absolute, right? Well, a quiet change was starting to happen, and from a really surprising person, Tara's own mother.
So Tara's mother was pushed into becoming a midwife, mostly because of her husband's whole self-reliance thing. And at first, she was terrified, absolutely terrified. Her first time helping with a difficult birth left her shaking, positive she couldn't do it. She was completely submissive, her own personality almost erased by her husband's.
But what happened next? It's a pretty incredible transformation. When the only other professional midwife in the area moved away, Tara's mother had no choice but to step up. She went from being this frightened assistant to being an essential, respected figure in their whole community. And with that power came something she'd never really had before, her own authority, her own confidence. And this newfound confidence, it also gave her a little bit of financial independence. That led to this small but totally revolutionary act of rebellion. One that would quietly start to chip away at the fortress of isolation her husband had so carefully built. What was it? The telephone. Now, her husband had forbidden a phone for years. He saw it as some kind of government spy tool, but, a midwife needs a phone. The logic was undeniable. So she had one installed. It was a literal connection to the outside world, a crack in the fortress walls. So as these little cracks start appearing and the outside world starts to seep in, Tara herself starts facing this really dizzying question about who she is and where she fits in. It's a question most of us answer without even thinking, right? When's your birthday? But for Tara, that question was a full-blown crisis. When her mother decided it was time to get the younger kids their birth certificates, that simple question opened up a whole chaotic mess about Tara's identity.
See, with no official record, her birthday was just up for debate. It was a mess of conflicting family stories. Was it the date her mom remembered or the one her dad insisted on? What about the one Grandma put on an affidavit or the dates on these old certificates? Her very existence wasn't a fixed point. It was this floating, undefined story, which just goes to show how untethered from the official world she really was.
And here's what Tara herself said about finally getting that birth certificate. The whole idea that she needed a piece of paper to prove she was a person, that her own life wasn't enough proof by itself, I mean, how weird and unsettling must that have felt?
And right in the middle of all this confusion, her grandmother tells her this powerful Apache legend, a story about how memory and myths get created. It's this perfect metaphor for her life, isn't it? She'd been given this one really powerful story, the one her father wrote, but she's starting to realize, hey, maybe that's not the only story out there for me.
And that leaves us with a big, central question of the whole book. With no official birthday, no school records, none of the things we use to define a life, Tara Westover's identity was essentially a blank page. The rest of her incredible story is about what happens when you finally decide to pick up the pen yourself,